Hook. E100 words. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists in front of a packed courtroom, and the woman who had spent 34 years saving lives didn't flinch. Maya Collins, 62 years old, uniform still creased from a night shift she'd never finished, stood accused of fraud, exploitation, and running an illegal operation out of the hospital that had been her entire world. The crowd stared. Some sneered. A reporter near the back was already typing the headline. Nobody in that room believed her. Nobody in that room knew that 3 men in full military dress were parking their vehicle outside, and that everything was about to collapse for the people who put her there. If this story already has you gripped, stay with me until the very end. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the city and country you're watching from. I want to see just how far Maya's story has traveled. The fluorescent lights in Courtroom 7 had a flicker that nobody ever fixed. It happened every 40 seconds, a brief stutter of yellow-white that made the whole room look slightly wrong, like a photograph taken with bad film. Maya Collins noticed it immediately when they brought her in. She noticed things like that, always had. 34 years as a nurse trained you to catch what most people ignored. The irregular beep of a monitor, the slight drag in someone's left foot, the flicker in a patient's eyes that meant the pain had crossed some invisible line. She had built her entire career on attention. Now she sat at a defense table with the public defender she'd met 40 minutes ago, and the courtroom was full of people who had already decided. Her wrists hurt where the cuffs had been. They'd removed them when she was seated, which she supposed was a mercy, but her left wrist had a bruise forming just below the joint. She could feel the heat of it without looking. She didn't look. She kept her eyes forward, her posture straight, and her hands folded on the table the way she used to sit during disciplinary reviews at Ravenwood Medical Center, back when those reviews had been about other people. The charge sheet was 3 pages long. Fraud. Misappropriation of charitable funds. Exploitation of vulnerable minors. Falsification of medical records. Operating an unlicensed residential facility. Her attorney, a young man named Derek Foss who smelled like he'd skipped breakfast, leaned over and whispered something about the prosecution's opening being mostly procedural. Maya didn't respond. She was watching the gallery, the rows of faces she mostly didn't recognize, people who had come to see the disgraced nurse, the woman whose photograph had run in the Orchard Falls Courier under the headline, Charity Fraud or Criminal Scheme, Local Nurse Accused of Exploiting the Children. She claimed to help. She spotted 3 people she did recognize. Darlene Marsh, the hospital's director of patient services, sat in the 3rd row with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression of practiced regret. The kind of regret that's really just relief wearing a mask. Beside her was Raymond Hollis, chief surgeon at Ravenwood, whose suit cost more than most of the nurses on his floor made in a month. And at the far end of the same row, half hidden behind a taller man in front of him, sat Councilman Gerald Pruitt, who had, 3 weeks ago, given a press statement calling for a full accounting of how taxpayer goodwill was allegedly weaponized. None of them looked at her. Maya's jaw tightened. She breathed through it. "Miss Collins." Derek Foss touched her arm lightly. "They're starting." The judge entered. The Honorable Patricia Osei, a woman with close-cropped silver hair and the deliberate stillness of someone who had spent decades not being surprised. She settled in, reviewed something on her bench, and looked up at the room with an expression that gave nothing away. "This court is now in session. Case number 44-1117B, the State of Oregon versus Maya Ann Collins." A pause. "Ms. Collins, you have entered a plea of not guilty to all counts. Is that still your plea?" Maya stood. Her knees were slightly stiff. She'd been sitting in a holding room for 2 hours. "Yes, Your Honor. Not guilty." "You may be seated." The assistant district attorney, a compact man named Jeffrey Strand, rose to deliver his opening. He was good at it. He had the kind of voice that sounded reasonable even when the words weren't, and he used a projected slide deck showing photographs of the building on Millhaven Street, a 2-story house that Maya had rented for 11 years, using her own income and a small foundation she'd registered legally to house children who had nowhere else to go. What the defendant called charity, Strand told the jury, was in reality a mechanism for financial gain. Medical records were altered, donors were misled, children were used as both justification and cover. Maya stared at the image of the Millhaven house on the projection screen. The porch. The blue door she'd painted herself one April weekend when one of the boys, Ryan, who was 7 then, and convinced that blue was the most important color in the world, had asked her why the door was still gray. She'd bought the paint that afternoon. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm, just hard enough. I saved those kids. I never stole from them. She had said those words to 3 different investigators over the past 4 months. She had said them to the hospital's internal review board. She had said them to Derek Foss the first time they met, and he had written them down and nodded and not quite met her eyes. She had said them to herself, in the kitchen of her apartment at 2 in the morning, standing in the dark because she couldn't sleep, and making tea she didn't drink. She would keep saying them until somebody believed her. What she had not said, to anyone, was the full story of how Ravenwood Medical Center had come to want that house on Millhaven Street badly enough to destroy her life to get it. Maya Collins had come to Orchard Falls, Oregon, 21 years ago with 3 boxes of belongings, a nursing license from the state of Washington, and no particular plan beyond finding work and getting some distance from a painful divorce that had taken a lot out of her. She'd been 39. She'd thought she was starting over. Ravenwood Medical Center hired her within 2 weeks. It was a mid-sized regional hospital, 4 floors, 212 beds, a level 3 trauma center that functioned above its classification because of the staff rather than the budget. Maya was placed in pediatric care, which had not been her specialty, but the floor was understaffed and she learned quickly. Within 6 months, she was one of the most reliable nurses on the unit. Within 2 years, she was the one training new hires. The Millhaven house came later. There was a boy. She always thought of it that way, tracing the whole thing back to one boy. His name was Ethan, and he was 9 years old when he showed up at the pediatric unit with a fractured forearm and no parent or guardian who could be contacted. He'd been brought in by a neighbor who hadn't stuck around. The fracture was clean, the treatment was straightforward, but what happened afterward was not. The system, already overwhelmed, failed to place him. He spent 4 days in a hospital room that was needed for sick children, sleeping in a chair because nobody had come. Maya brought him home. It was not a decision she'd planned. She had a 1-bedroom apartment. She had no training in foster care, no formal certification, and the legal pathway was complicated and slow. What she had was a spare couch, and the inescapable understanding that she could not leave a 9-year-old child in a chair in a hospital hallway while she went home to an empty apartment and waited for the system to sort itself out. She applied for emergency foster status the next morning. She took on extra shifts to cover the income reduction. She moved her bed into the living room and gave Ethan the bedroom. He didn't say much for the first 2 weeks, and then one afternoon she came home to find he had made dinner. Badly, mostly burned, the pan soaked in the sink. And he said, without looking at her, "I wanted to do something." She stood in that kitchen for a moment and didn't say anything either. Ryan came 8 months later. Ryan was 7, Ethan's younger half-brother, discovered during the process of formalizing Ethan's placement. The caseworker who called Maya was apologetic and not hopeful. Maya said yes before the woman finished the sentence. Noah came the year after that. Noah was not related to either of them by blood. He was 6, and he had been found in a bus station, and the case was more complicated than either of the first 2, and it took a long time to get the paperwork right. During that time, Maya rented the Millhaven house, because 3 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment was not sustainable, and she had finally cleared enough debt to manage the deposit and first month. She established the Millhaven Foundation shortly after, small, local, formally registered, with donor reports filed annually. It was never a large operation. She was one person, working full-time nursing shifts, raising 3 boys, and running a foundation on the side. She did it the way she did most things, without expecting recognition, without making noise about it, one day at a time. She also did it without telling Ravenwood Medical Center. Not because it was wrong, because she'd seen what happened when institutions got involved in things that were working. She had kept the 2 parts of her life separate, which turned out to be the thing they would later use against her. The secrecy, the off-books nature of it, the fact that she hadn't been loudly official about every step. The boys grew up. They left. They made their own lives in ways that still occasionally made Maya's chest tight when she thought about it too directly. She kept the Millhaven house for other kids. The foundation continued. The house became a transitional residence, short-term stays, documented, supported by a network of local donors, operating quietly and effectively for 11 years. And then Ravenwood Medical Center submitted a development application. The hospital's expansion plan was, on paper, a straightforward infrastructure project, a new outpatient wing, a parking structure, and a community wellness center to be built on a block of land adjacent to the main campus. Several properties were involved. Most of the owners accepted the buyout offers quickly. The Millhaven house was on that block. Maya refused. She refused politely the first time, explaining that the foundation was active and the residence was housing children. She refused more firmly the second time, when the offer came back higher and the tone of the communication had shifted to something that felt less like a negotiation and more like an expectation. She refused a third time through an attorney, noting that the foundation had a long-term lease and an active client load and that she was not interested in selling. That was in February. The investigation into the Millhaven Foundation was opened in March. The speed of it had impressed her, in a grim way. Within 6 weeks, the hospital's internal compliance office had generated a report, later obtained by ADA Strand, alleging financial irregularities in the foundation's records. The report pointed to 3 donors whose contributions had been processed in ways that, the report claimed, suggested the money had not gone where it was supposed to go. It pointed to 3 children who had passed through the Millhaven residence whose medical records, obtained from Ravenwood's own system, contained notations that the report characterized as inconsistent. Maya knew immediately who had generated those inconsistencies. She had worked at Ravenwood for 21 years. She knew exactly what the records had said before someone changed them. She said as much to Derek Foss, who wrote it down and looked slightly overwhelmed. "Do you have copies of the originals?" he asked. "I printed them," Maya said, "in January, before any of this started. I had a feeling." He had looked at her then with something she couldn't quite read. "Why in January?" "Because when Raymond Hollis stopped saying hello to me in the hallway, I knew something had changed." She paused. "He'd said hello every morning for 9 years. People don't just stop doing things like that for no reason." Foss had stared at his notepad. "Miss Collins, that's circumstantial," she agreed. "I know, but I printed the records anyway." What she had not told him, what she hadn't told anyone, was that she had also, in January, sent copies of those records to 3 addresses. 3 men who no longer lived in Orchard Falls, Oregon, but who had grown up in a house with a blue door and who she trusted more than anyone else on earth. The prosecution's opening took 45 minutes. It was thorough, organized, and built a picture of Maya as someone who had exploited a gap in the oversight system, a woman who had used genuine charitable impulse as a cover for something less genuine. Strand was careful never to say she was cruel. That would have been too easy to refute. Instead, he suggested she was calculating, that the warmth was real enough but had been used strategically, that the children had been the means and not the end. Maya sat through it with her hands folded. When Strand sat down, Judge Osei looked at the defense table. "Mr. Foss, opening statement." Derek Foss rose. He was nervous. She could tell by the way he touched the knot of his tie. But he steadied himself and spoke clearly. He outlined the defense argument, that the evidence had been manufactured, that the financial records had been altered by parties with a direct interest in acquiring the Millhaven property, that the children Maya Collins had housed were not victims, but beneficiaries of a genuine program, and that testimony would establish this beyond reasonable doubt. It was a good statement. It was also, Maya knew, fighting uphill. The prosecution had the hospital's compliance report. They had 3 altered medical records. They had 2 donors who had been contacted by investigators and who had apparently been confused enough by the process to give statements that were less than helpful. And they had Raymond Hollis and Darlene Marsh and Gerald Pruitt, all of whom would testify in ways that would be credible and polished and devastating. What Derek Foss had was a nurse with 34 years of service and a folder of documents she'd printed in January. What Maya had was the knowledge that the envelope she'd mailed in January, the one addressed to a military base in Nevada, had been signed for Sab. The first witness was called after the lunch recess. Maya barely touched the sandwich Derek had brought her, which he didn't comment on but noted with a look. She drank the coffee, which was terrible, and watched the afternoon light shift through the courtroom's high windows. Darlene Marsh took the stand at 1:48 p.m. She was dressed in a navy blazer and wore her reading glasses on a chain, and she testified with the careful, sorrowful manner of someone who very much regretted having to tell the truth about a colleague. She spoke about the compliance review, about the Foundation's record-keeping, about the decision to refer the matter to the district attorney's office. And at any point during this review, Ada Strand asked, did Ms. Collins deny that the irregularities existed? No, Darlene said. She said that she could explain them. But when we asked for documentation, the documentation she provided didn't account for the discrepancies we'd identified. Thank you, Derek cross-examined. He asked about the timeline of the compliance review, establishing that it had begun 2 weeks after Maya's third refusal to sell the Millhaven property. Darlene acknowledged the timing, but attributed it to an unrelated tip from a donor. And who was the donor? Derek asked. I'm not able to disclose that without, Your Honor, the defense moves to compel disclosure of the informant's identity as part of discovery we've already requested. Noted, Judge Osei said. We'll address that separately. Continue. It went on for 90 minutes. When Darlene stepped down, Raymond Hollis took her place. He was a practiced witness, calm, measured, deeply sympathetic to Maya Collins as a person, while being absolutely clear about the institution's obligation to investigate. He spoke about the hospital's mission. He spoke about the duty of care owed to vulnerable children. He spoke, at some length, about the difficulty of discovering that a trusted colleague had, however unintentionally, allowed a charitable program to become financially compromised. Maya listened. She kept her expression neutral. Under the table, her right hand had closed into a loose fist. At 3:42 p.m., Derek had finished his cross of Hollis, and the judge was about to announce a brief recess when the rear doors of Courtroom 7 opened. The hinges were loud. The sound cut through the background noise of the gallery with a precision that made several people turn. Maya turned with them, and then she went very still. 3 men walked in. They were in uniform, full military dress, the kind worn for formal occasions, with ribbons and insignia and the particular quality of presence that comes from years of training. The gallery responded to them the way galleries always respond to men in uniform, with a hush that fell over the room like a change in air pressure. Maya knew their faces immediately. She would have known them anywhere. Ethan was 40 now, and the boy with the broken arm had become a man built like a wall, with Colonel's eagles on his shoulders, and the kind of stillness that comes from having stood in very dangerous places and decided to keep standing. Ryan, 38, had his mother's eyes, his biological mother, whom he'd never known well, but the eyes had come down clean, and the captain's bars on his uniform, and the careful attentiveness of someone who was always tracking 4 things at once. Noah, 37, wore a different kind of insignia, the technical markings of cyber operations, and he carried a hard-sided case in his right hand with the specific care of someone who knows exactly what's in it. They walked down the center aisle as if they had reserved seats, which they hadn't. Raymond Hollis had turned around on the witness stand to see what everyone else was looking at. Maya saw his face in the moment he registered the uniforms, the insignia, the case in Noah's hand, and she watched something shift behind his expression, something that wasn't quite fear yet, but was moving in that direction. Judge Osei leaned forward. We're in session. Who are these individuals? Ethan Cross stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was level and carried without effort to every corner of the room. Colonel Ethan Cross, United States Army Special Operations Command. Your Honor, we have evidence material to these proceedings. Evidence that was generated under federal authorization and that directly contradicts the testimony this court has heard today. The room did not explode. It went quiet in a way that was, in its own way, louder than an explosion. Derek Foss was on his feet. Ada Strand was on his feet. Judge Osei had both hands flat on her bench. Maya Collins sat very still at the defense table and looked at the 3 men she had raised in a house with a blue door, and for the first time in 4 months, something in her chest loosened by exactly 1 degree. Raymond Hollis, still on the witness stand, had gone pale in a way that was visible from across the room. His hands, Maya noticed, had found each other on the railing. He was gripping them together. She looked at him. He didn't look back. Mr. Foss, Judge Osei said, I assume you'd like a moment. Yes, Your Honor, Derek said, and his voice had changed. The nervousness was still there, but something else had joined it. The defense would like to request a 30-minute recess and move to admit these individuals as emergency witnesses material to the defense. Strand was already objecting. The judge was already calling for order. The gallery was already moving, the low murmur of 100 people all shifting in their seats at once, the flicker of that defective fluorescent light catching the moment in a series of uneven frames. Ethan Cross stood in the center aisle and didn't move. Ryan was beside him. Noah had set the hard-sided case on the floor next to his feet with the particular deliberateness of someone who intends to open it very soon. Maya looked at the case. She thought about what she had mailed to a base in Nevada in January. The documents, the printed records, the summary she had written in her own handwriting across 3 pages of yellow legal pad, the way she'd described what had been changed in those files and what the originals had said and why it mattered. She thought about how Noah, who had grown into one of the military's leading specialists in digital forensic evidence, had signed for that envelope. Raymond Hollis was still gripping the railing of the witness stand. The color had not come back to his face. Judge Osei banged her gavel once, sharp, and the gallery noise cut off. "We will recess for 30 minutes, she said. "When we reconvene, I want counsel for both sides and these 3 individuals in my chambers. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Derek said. "Yes, Your Honor," Strand said, and he didn't sound happy about it. The judge stood. The courtroom stood with her, and in the moment before the room began to move, before the bailiff started directing people and the gallery broke into urgent, whispered conversation, Maya Collins looked at Ethan Cross. He looked back at her. He didn't smile. Ethan rarely smiled in serious moments, always had been that way, even as a boy. But there was something in his expression that was unmistakable. "We're here," it said. "We've got you." Maya breathed in, turned back to face the front of the room. Her hands, still folded on the table, were steady. But Raymond Hollis, who had just come off the witness stand after testifying for 90 minutes about duty and trust and the sad necessity of institutional accountability, was already leaning toward the prosecutor's table, and Maya could see from 12 feet away that his mouth was moving fast. Whatever he was saying it in a hurry. Whatever he was saying it in a hurry. And that, Maya thought, was the first honest thing Raymond Hollis had done all day. The recess lasted longer than 30 minutes. It lasted 47, which Derek Foss spent mostly on his phone in the hallway outside chambers, and which Maya spent sitting at the defense table drinking a second terrible cup of coffee while the bailiff stood near the door and didn't make conversation. The gallery had been cleared for the break. Without the audience, the courtroom felt different, larger and more indifferent, the way institutional spaces always feel when the performance has paused. The fluorescent light flickered. Maya counted the seconds between stutters. 38, 41, 39. When Derek came back, he sat down beside her and for a moment just looked at his notepad. "So," he said. "So," she said. "Those 3 men." He stopped, started again. "You know them?" It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "Yes." "And the case that the one, Noah, is carrying." "I sent him documents in January," Maya said. "Records I'd printed from Ravenwood's system. He does forensic work. Digital forensics, specifically. He's been doing it for about 8 years. Derek set down his pen. He turned to look at her directly, which he hadn't done much of in their 40 minutes of acquaintance before this morning. "Ms. Collins, did you know they were going to show up today?" Maya considered the question honestly. "I knew they'd received what I sent. I didn't know when they'd act on it, or how." She paused. "Ethan makes his own plans. He always has." Derek was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was recalibrating, reorganizing, fitting new information into a structure he'd built with different assumptions. She recognized it. She'd seen that look on junior nurses when a patient's chart contradicted what they'd been told in handover. "What's in the case?" he asked. "I don't know exactly," she said, "but Noah doesn't carry things he doesn't intend to use." Judge Osei's chambers were small and very full. Ethan Cross stood near the window. He had the habit, she later learned, of positioning himself so he could see both the door and the room's occupants simultaneously, a reflex so ingrained he no longer noticed doing it. Ryan sat in the chair across from the judge's desk. Noah had placed the case on the floor beside him and kept one hand on it with the casual attentiveness of someone who'd been trained to guard equipment in conditions considerably more hostile than an Oregon courthouse. ADA. Jeffrey Strand sat across from them with his arms folded. His assistant, a young woman named Priya, who handled most of his documentation, was typing steadily on a laptop and trying not to look at the three uniformed officers taking up most of the available oxygen in the room. Judge Osei had read what they'd handed her. She'd read it twice. When she set the folder down, her expression was the same as it always was. Contained, considered, but her voice had a different quality than it had in the courtroom. "Colonel Cross," she said, "walk me through the chain of custody on these documents." Ethan did. He was methodical and precise and used no unnecessary words. He explained that the documents had originated as printed copies of digital records from Ravenwood Medical Center's internal network, provided to him by Maya Collins in January. I explained that his brother Noah, in his capacity as a senior analyst with the Army Cyber Operations Division, had used those printed records as a reference baseline against which to compare digital forensic extractions from the hospital's own servers, extractions obtained through a federal warrant issued by a judge in the Western District of Oregon after the three of them had presented preliminary evidence of potential obstruction and fraud. Strand uncrossed his arms. "A federal warrant," he said flatly. "Issued 11 days ago," Ethan confirmed. "And you didn't see fit to inform this court. The warrant was issued to a federal investigative body. This proceeding is a state matter. The obligation to inform this court of material evidence falls to the parties in this case, not to federal investigators." He looked at Strand without hostility. "That obligation now exists because we're here." Strand looked at Judge Osei. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Most things that matter are," the judge said. She turned to Noah. "The documents in that case, what are they?" Noah opened it. He worked quickly and without ceremony, laying items out on the small conference table that occupied one side of the chambers, printouts, organized in labeled sections, a sealed external drive with a federal evidence tag, and a bound report that ran to 40 pages, bearing the seal of Army Cyber Operations and the classification designation that had been reduced from its original level specifically for this proceeding. "The core of it," Noah said, "is a comparison between the Ravenwood records as they exist in the hospital's current system and the same records as they existed in a backup archive that the hospital's IT department had not fully purged. The backup was 6 months old. It predated the compliance review." He tapped the report. 17 patient records were altered after the backup date. 3 of those records correspond to children who passed through the Millhaven Foundation residence. The alterations introduced discrepancies that didn't exist in the original versions. The room was very quiet. "The financial records are a separate matter," Noah continued. "We obtained the Millhaven Foundation's bank records through the warrant and cross-referenced them against the donor statements that the hospital's compliance report relied on. 2 of those donors, the ones whose statements suggest funds were misrouted, were contacted by an intermediary connected to Gerald Pruitt's office 7 weeks before the compliance review began. Both donors have since provided supplemental statements to federal investigators, clarifying that their original statements were based on information given to them by that intermediary, not on their own records." Strand had stopped looking at Judge Osei. He was looking at the 40-page report. "There's more," Ryan said. He'd been quiet until now. "The land acquisition." He laid out a separate folder, property records, internal communications between Ravenwood's development office and the city planning department, a series of emails between Darlene Marsh and an aide in Gerald Pruitt's office. The emails were dated. The earliest one was dated 9 days before Maya's first refusal to sell. "They already knew she'd refuse," Ryan said. "The compliance review wasn't a response to the refusal. It was prepared before they made the offer. They needed it ready." The silence in chambers had a weight to it now. Judge Osei looked at the materials for a long moment. Then she looked at ADA Strand. "Mr. Strand," she said, "I need you to tell me what you knew and when." Strand's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, my office relied on the hospital's compliance report and the investigative materials provided by the county. I had no reason to question the provenance of those materials." "That may be," she said, "but you are questioning it now, and so am I." She looked at her clerk. "We're going to need additional time. I'm going to issue a continuance for 48 hours and refer these materials to the State Attorney General's office for review." She paused. "I'm also going to ask that Colonel Cross and his associates remain available." "We'll be here," Ethan said. Maya was told about the continuance by Derek, who came back into the courtroom with the particular walk of someone who has just been handed a situation considerably larger than he'd anticipated when he took the case. He sat down. He laid his notepad on the table and looked at it, and then looked at her. 48-hour continuance, he said. The judge is referring the new evidence to the AG's office. Maya absorbed this. How bad is it for them? Derek thought about the question carefully. If the forensic comparison holds, and the chain of custody seems solid, then the core documents the prosecution built their case on were fabricated after the fact. He paused. That's not a procedural problem. That's obstruction, evidence tampering, potentially conspiracy. Hollis, Maya said, and Marsh, and based on what Colonel Cross told the judge, possibly Pruitt's office. Maya nodded slowly. She had known all of this. She had known it for months, had felt it the way you feel a draft from a door that shouldn't have any gap, a wrongness that precise and directional. Knowing it and watching someone else lay it out with federal documentation and 40 pages of forensic analysis were two different experiences, and she was processing the distance between them. Where are they now? She asked. Ethan and the others. Conference room down the hall. The judge asked them to stay in the building. Derek looked at her. Do you want to see them? Maya thought about the question for longer than a person who'd said yes reflexively would. Give me a few minutes. She sat at the defense table alone while Derek went to make calls. The courtroom was still empty except for the bailiff, who had found a newspaper and seemed committed to it. The fluorescent light flickered. Maya watched it for a moment. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked down the hall. The conference room was institutional beige, with a rectangular table and chairs that had been bought for functionality rather than comfort, and a window that looked out at the parking structure rather than anything better. Ryan was standing at the window. Ethan was seated at the table with a cup of coffee he appeared to have acquired from somewhere. Noah was still working, his laptop was open, and he was typing with the focused attention of a man who considers stopping a personal failing. When Maya opened the door, Ryan turned first. He'd always had the fastest reflexes of the three of them. Even as a boy, always the first to hear a car in the driveway, always the first to notice a change in weather. Now he turned and looked at her, and something in his face that had been very controlled and military and composed for the last 2 hours shifted in a way that wasn't any of those things. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. It wasn't much. It was also exactly enough. Ethan stood. Noah looked up from his laptop. Maya stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the three of them. Men now, with ranks and responsibilities and lives that had taken them to places she'd never been, and felt the full weight of 20-odd years settle into the room without displacing anything. She went to the table and sat down across from Ethan. He sat back down. Noah closed the laptop. You got the package, she said. January 14th, Ethan confirmed. Noah had the preliminary analysis done by the 22nd. 8 days. He's fast. Noah shrugged without looking up. The backup archive was the lucky break. They'd wiped the production environment but didn't get to the archive before we pulled the warrant. Maya looked at him. You went federal with this. It needed to be federal, Ethan said. State-level records requests can be stonewalled. Federal warrants issued by a judge on evidence of obstruction are harder to slow down. Did anyone push back? Pruitt's people tried, Ryan said. His attorney filed an emergency motion to quash the warrant 2 days after it was issued. Judge denied it in about 4 hours. Maya processed this. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Old habit, something she'd done since nursing school when she needed to think clearly. How solid is it, the forensic comparison? Solid, Noah said, and the word was so unqualified that it carried its own certainty. They'll try to challenge it. They'll try, he agreed. They won't get far. The metadata on the alterations is specific. We have timestamps, user IDs, and the backup versions to compare against. The delta is clear. Ethan was looking at her in the way he'd always looked at her when he was about to say something he'd thought about for a long time. She recognized it the same way she recognized the flicker in that courtroom light. Why did you wait? He asked. To send it to us. You said you printed those records in January. Why not sooner? She looked at him. Because I wanted to try to handle it without pulling you into it. That was... He stopped. Probably stubborn, she said. I know. I was going to say it was exactly what you would do, he said. But yes, also stubborn. Ryan made a sound that in another context might have been a laugh. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was the sound of a man who had spent years in situations with no good options and had developed a specific relationship with things being exactly as complicated as expected. They built the case against you before they even approached you about the land, he said. That's the part that... He stopped, chose different words. That's the part that's hard to sit with. I know, she said. They were going to do this regardless of what you decided. Probably, she said. The refusal just gave them a schedule. She looked around the table. 3 men who had once eaten burned dinner at a second-hand table in a house with a blue door, who now carried federal warrants and classified reports, and the particular kind of competence that comes from being tested in ways most people never face. I'm glad you're here, she said. It wasn't adequate, but it was what she had, and it was true. Ethan nodded. Ryan looked at the window. Noah opened his laptop again, which for him was the equivalent of an emotional response. What happens in 48 hours? She asked. The AG's office reviews the materials, Ethan said. Based on what we've already discussed with the federal investigative team, they're likely to open a parallel investigation. The case against you doesn't survive once the evidentiary basis is established as fabricated. And Hollis, and Marsh, and whoever in Pruitt's office was coordinating. He paused. There's an email chain, Maya. It's pretty specific about what they were trying to accomplish. She wanted to ask to see it. She didn't. She trusted Noah's 40 pages to contain what it needed to contain, and she trusted Ethan's judgment on what she needed to know right now and what could wait. She had made a career of knowing when to ask the next question and when to wait for the information to arrive in its own time. Okay, she said, then we wait 48 hours. The 48 hours were not quiet. By the following morning, the Orchard Falls Courier had a new story. The headline was careful. Military officers present evidence in nurse's fraud trial. But the body of the piece, written by a reporter who had clearly been given more information than the paper's legal team was comfortable with, outlined the broad shape of the forensic findings without specifics. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 state news outlets. By evening, it was on 2 national feeds. Maya did not watch the coverage. She had gone home, a short drive to her apartment, where the bookshelves held 30 years of nursing manuals and a collection of paperback novels she'd been meaning to reread for most of the last decade. And she had slept for 9 hours, which was the first time she'd slept that long in 4 months. She woke at 6, made real coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with the stack of legal documents Derek had messaged her the night before. She read through them carefully, marking things with a red pen, the same way she used to review patient charts at the start of a shift. The habit was the habit. The material was different. The approach was the same. At 8:14 a.m., her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered. Miss Collins. The voice was female, efficient, and did not waste time on pleasantries. My name is Investigator Sandra Okafor. I'm with the Oregon Attorney General's office. We've reviewed the materials submitted to Judge Osei yesterday, and we'd like to speak with you this morning, if that's possible. What time? Maya asked. 9 o'clock, if you can manage it. Our offices, or we can come to you. I'll come to you, Maya said. She was there at 8:52. Sandra Okafor was in her 40s, with the kind of organized desk that suggested she was managing a larger caseload than the desk itself could fully contain. She had the materials from Noah's case spread across a conference table and had clearly been at it for some time before Maya arrived. She shook hands briefly, offered coffee that Maya declined, and got to it. I want to be direct with you, Okafor said. The forensic evidence is compelling. The backup archive comparison is particularly strong. I've had our own digital forensics unit do a preliminary review this morning, and they concur with the Army's methodology. Maya sat across from her. What does that mean for the charges? We're preparing a recommendation to the DA's office to drop all charges against you. That's not final yet, but based on what we have, I'd expect that recommendation to go through before the end of today. The room was quiet for a moment. Maya had expected to feel something large and immediate, relief, or anger, or some combination. What she actually felt was a kind of measured stillness, the way you feel when you've been braced against something heavy for a long time, and the weight is starting, slowly, to shift. Not gone, moving. And the people who built the case, she said. Okafor's expression didn't change, but something in it sharpened slightly. That's a separate matter, and I can't speak to ongoing investigations. What I can tell you is that we take evidence tampering and obstruction very seriously, and what was presented to Judge Ose yesterday gives us significant grounds to pursue this. Hollis, Maya said. Not a question, not a statement, just the name, set down on the table between them. Okafor looked at her. I can't comment on individuals. Maya nodded. She hadn't expected her to. Is there anything you need from me? We'll need a formal specifically about the timeline. When you first noticed the irregularities in the records, the interactions with the hospital's development office, the contact you had with the 3 officers regarding the documents. She paused. The statement could take a while. Are you prepared for that today? Yes, Maya said. I've been prepared for it for 4 months. They started at 9:15 and finished at 12:40. Maya talked, and Okafor's assistant recorded and transcribed, and Maya went through it the same way she'd gone through 4 months of review boards and investigator interviews, methodically, without drama, without embellishment. Beginning with the first morning Raymond Hollis had walked past her in the hallway without saying hello, and ending with the conversation in the conference room the previous afternoon. When they finished, Okafor walked her to the elevator. Ms. Collins, she said as the doors opened, off the record for a moment. Maya paused. What you did for those 3 men, Okafor said carefully. It's in the record, what you did, how you did it. She stopped. A lot of people would have made very different choices. In your position, the original position, I mean, before all of this. Maya looked at her. I just did what was in front of me, she said. Okafor nodded slowly. I know, she said. That's what I meant. The elevator doors closed. Maya was in the parking garage, keys in hand, when her phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan. The AG's office called us, he said. They want Noah in for a technical debrief this afternoon. I know, I just left them. A pause. How are you? She thought about it. Her wrist still had the bruise from the handcuffs. Her apartment still had 4 months of legal documents stacked on her kitchen counter. The hospital that had employed her for 21 years had, as of the previous afternoon, issued a terse statement saying they were cooperating fully with any and all investigations, which was the corporate equivalent of someone backing slowly toward the exit. I'm okay, she said. It was approximately true. Noah found something else, Ethan said, last night after the debrief. Something the warrant didn't initially cover, but that he flagged to the federal team this morning. She stopped walking. What kind of something? The development project, he said. The expansion plan for the hospital. There's a secondary set of financial agreements attached to it. The land acquisition on Millhaven Street was one piece, but the full project involves 5 other properties. And the financial structure of the deal, he paused. Maya, Pruitt's office wasn't just coordinating with Ravenwood. There's a private development entity involved, one that has existing relationships with city contracts going back at least 8 years. She leaned against a concrete pillar. The garage smelled of oil and cold air. How big? We don't know yet. Noah's still working through it. Another pause. What started as a case against you may be something significantly larger. The fluorescent lights in the parking garage hummed steadily. No flicker, nothing irregular, just a flat and consistent light that illuminated everything equally and made no distinctions. Maya held the phone and thought about a 2-story house with a blue door and a boy who had once made her a burned dinner because he wanted to do something. Ethan, she said. Yeah. Whatever it is, she said. We see it through. She heard him breathe. Yeah, he said. We do. She was walking toward her car when she saw the figure standing at the garage entrance. She recognized him immediately. The expensive suit, the way he stood with the slightly forward lean of a man accustomed to dominating the space he occupied. Raymond Hollis. Not in the courthouse. Not in a conference room. Here, in the parking garage, which meant he had followed her, or had known she would be here, and neither of those options was particularly comfortable. He raised one hand, palm out. I just want to talk. Maya stopped. Her phone was still in her hand. She thought about lifting it and calling Ethan back. She thought about walking past Hollis without a word. She thought about the 34 years she had spent working in his hospital, The 21 years she had been invisible to everyone in administration until she owned something they wanted. "You have about 30 seconds," she said. His expression was doing something she'd never seen on it before. Raymond Hollis was not, in her experience, a man who looked uncertain. He looked uncertain now. "There are things," he said slowly, "that I was told had been handled properly. I want you to understand that I didn't know the extent of what you built against me," she said flatly. He stopped. "The extent of what?" she said. "The fabricated records, the donor statements, the email chain that predates your first offer to buy my property?" She watched his face. "Because if you didn't know, Raymond, then someone in your organization was running a federal evidence tampering operation in your name, and you had no idea. And I'm not sure which of those versions is actually better for you." His jaw moved. Nothing came out. 30 seconds, she said. Clock ran. She walked past him. She did not look back. Behind her, she heard his footsteps, moving away toward the street, moving faster than they had arrived. She got in her car. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek Foss. "AG rec to drop charges just filed. Official." She read it twice. Set the phone on the passenger seat, looked at the concrete wall in front of her. Somewhere in a conference room across the city, Noah Cross was working through a set of financial records that apparently opened into something much larger than a land deal and a ruined nurse. And Raymond Hollis was walking somewhere in the cold air outside, trying to calculate how much he'd already lost and how much more was coming. Maya started the car. The engine turned over on the second try. It always needed the second try, had for years. She'd never gotten it fixed. And she pulled out of the space and drove toward the exit. She didn't know yet what Noah's additional findings would open up. She didn't know how large it was, or how deep it went, or how many names were at the bottom of it. She didn't know what tomorrow's session in Courtroom 7 would look like, or whether Raymond Hollis's lawyer was right now making calls that would complicate the next 48 hours in ways nobody had accounted for. What she knew was that Derek had texted her 4 words that contained the beginning of everything she was owed, and that somewhere in those financial records, in the secondary agreements, and the 8-year trail of city contracts, and the private development entity that had apparently been doing business with Orchard Falls long before anyone decided a nurse on Millhaven Street was a convenient problem to solve. Somewhere in all of that was the rest of the truth. And Noah Cross, who had once been 6 years old in a bus station and had grown into the kind of man who didn't stop until he had the complete picture, was still at his laptop, still working. The engine ran quiet on the highway back, and Maya kept both hands on the wheel and didn't turn on the radio. Noah was still working. That was the thing she held on to. Not the text from Derek, not the parking garage, not Hollis's face doing that unfamiliar, uncertain thing. Noah was still working, which meant the picture wasn't complete yet, which meant there was more to come. And the more that was coming was going to be larger and more consequential than a land deal and a ruined nurse and a 3-page charge sheet. She had understood this in an abstract way since January. She understood it differently now. She got home, changed out of the clothes she'd worn to the AG's office, and made a second pot of coffee she actually drank. She sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything she remembered from the conversation with Okafor. Not because she needed to, but because the act of writing things down had always helped her think, and she needed to think clearly about what came next. What came next arrived faster than she expected. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Derek Foss called. His voice had the quality she was starting to associate with new information, arriving at a speed that outpaced his ability to fully process it. "The AG's office has filed a motion," he said. "They're not just recommending dismissal. They're moving to vacate the charges entirely, which is a different procedural step. It goes on the record as a wrongful prosecution, not a dropped case." "What's the difference?" Maya asked, though she had a sense. "A dropped case is administrative. Vacated charges mean the court is acknowledging the prosecution itself was improper. It creates a formal record." He paused. "It also makes the civil liability question significantly more concrete." She hadn't thought about civil liability. She thought about it now. For whom? "That's what the AG is going to spend the next several weeks determining," Derek said. "But based on the evidence, the hospital, the city's planning office, and potentially several individuals are looking at exposure." He paused again. "Raymond Hollis called my office an hour ago." Maya set down her pen. "Why?" His attorney called mine, Derek clarified. They want to know if you'd be willing to enter into pre-litigation discussions, which is attorney language for they want to see if they can settle this quietly before it becomes something you can't control. What did you tell them? I told them I'd pass on the inquiry, he said, and I'm passing it on. This is your decision. Maya looked at the legal pad in front of her, the notes she'd made. 21 years of hallway greetings and patient charts and night shifts, and a house with a blue door that Raymond Hollis wanted to turn into a parking structure. Tell them no, she said. A beat. Maya, tell them no, she said again quietly, without heat. Whatever they're going to offer won't be enough to account for what they took, and I'm not interested in quiet. Derek was silent for a moment. Okay, he said. I'll let them know. Noah's second finding broke 2 days later, and it broke publicly. He had flagged it first to the federal investigative team, then to the AG's office, and the AG's office had acted on it with a speed that suggested they'd been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The financial entity tied to the Millhaven development wasn't just connected to one city contract. It was the central node of a procurement network that had been steering municipal contracts, construction, infrastructure, medical supply, through a series of shell relationships for the better part of a decade. Gerald Pruitt's name was in the middle of it, not at the edges, not as a passive beneficiary, but in the middle. In an email chain, in a series of financial transfers, in a consulting agreement with a company that existed primarily on paper and whose sole documented activity was providing municipal relations services to entities with active city contracts. The Orchard Falls Courier didn't have it first. A Portland-based investigative outlet called the Pacific Record broke it on a Thursday morning, citing unnamed sources familiar with the federal investigation. By the time Maya read it over breakfast, the story had already generated 47 news alerts on Derek's phone and a call from the state legislature's oversight committee requesting a briefing. Maya read the article twice. She was mentioned in the fourth paragraph, the case against a local nurse that federal investigators now believe was constructed specifically to facilitate the land acquisition. And then, not again until the final paragraph, which described the Millhaven Foundation in 3 sentences that were accurate and, for the first time in 4 months, entirely fair. She put down her phone and finished her breakfast. The court session reconvened on a Friday, 9 days after the recess. Courtroom 7 was different this time. The gallery was fuller, standing room only, people in the back who hadn't been there before, including 2 reporters she recognized from the outlets that had picked up the Pacific Record story. The fluorescent light had been fixed, she noticed. Someone had finally replaced the tube. The light was steady and even and changed nothing. Judge Osei entered. The room stood. The room sat. This court has received and reviewed the motion filed by the Oregon Attorney General's office, the judge said. The motion requests that all charges against Maya Ann Collins be vacated in their entirety on the grounds that the evidentiary basis for those charges has been established as fabricated through a subsequent forensic investigation. The court has independently reviewed the forensic materials and the AG's summary findings. She looked up from the bench. Does the prosecution have a response? Ada Strand stood. He looked like a man who had spent 9 days in a room with documents he hadn't been shown before. Your Honor, the prosecution does not oppose the motion. It wasn't an admission. It wasn't an apology. It was the sound of a position becoming indefensible and a professional doing the only thing that remained. The motion is granted, Judge Osei said. All charges against Maya Ann Collins are vacated. The record will reflect that this prosecution was initiated on the basis of evidence subsequently determined to be falsified, and that no credible evidence exists to support any of the charges as originally filed. She looked directly at Maya for a moment, just a moment. Ms. Collins, you are free to go. The court regrets the circumstances that brought you here. Maya stood. Her legs were steady. Her hands were at her sides. The gallery erupted, not into cheering, exactly, but into that particular human sound of a room full of people all exhaling at once, and then immediately filling the silence with noise. Behind her, she heard the reporters moving, phones out. Beside her, Derek Foss was writing something on his notepad with the energetic scrawl of a man who would bill for this moment and feel entirely justified doing so. She looked at the prosecution table, where Jeffrey Strand was putting papers into his briefcase with the careful movements of someone who is focused on the task in front of him, because the alternative is looking up. She looked at the gallery, at the third row where Darlene Marsh had sat 9 days ago with her reading glasses on a chain. The third row was different people today. She looked at the back of the courtroom where Ethan and Ryan were standing. Noah was beside them with his laptop bag over one shoulder, already halfway to the door because there was a federal debrief scheduled for 2 o'clock, and Noah Cross did not miss scheduled debriefs. Ryan caught her eye. He raised his chin slightly. 1 degree, no more. She raised hers back. She did not go home. She drove to the hospital. Not to Ravenwood's main entrance, which she'd been told in a stiff letter from the hospital's legal team 8 weeks ago. She was not to enter pending resolution of the case. She drove it to the side street that ran along the east wing, where the employee parking lot was, and she sat in her car and looked at the building she'd worked in for 21 years. It was a large building, not particularly beautiful, with the functional architecture of something built in the 80s and expanded twice since. She had walked through its hallways so many times that she could do it with her eyes closed. She knew where the good vending machine was and where the broken one had stood for 3 years before anyone filed the work order. She knew which elevator was slowest and which attending physician always double-parked in the spot near the service entrance. She knew the sound of the pediatric unit at 2 in the morning, the different quality of quiet, the specific way silence stretched between the beeps of monitors and the footsteps of the night nurse on rounds. She hadn't been inside for 4 months. She was still sitting there when her phone rang. It was Ethan. "Where are you?" he asked. "East Side parking lot, Ravenwood." A pause. "Okay." "I'm not going in," she said. "I just needed to—" She stopped. She wasn't sure what she'd needed. "I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said. "That's not why I called." His voice shifted slightly. "Noah's at the federal debrief. The team lead pulled him aside before it started and told him the scope is wider than they initially estimated." "Wider how?" "They're looking at 4 other municipalities in the state. The same financial entity, same shell structure, same methodology. Orchard Falls wasn't the first time and wasn't going to be the last." He paused. "The case is federal now. Full case, not just the evidence piece." Maya absorbed this. Outside the car window, a nurse she didn't recognize was crossing the parking lot, moving fast, scrubs under a jacket, coffee cup in one hand. The rhythm of a shift change. "When does that become public?" she asked. "Probably within the week. The Pacific Record already has pieces of it. Noah says they're building toward a longer piece, and the AG's office is coordinating a press conference. Will you testify?" "If they need us, yes." No hesitation. That was never in question. She watched the nurse disappear through the side entrance. "There's going to be pressure to make this political," she said. "Pruitt has people. He'll try to slow it down." "He's been trying," Ethan said. "His attorneys filed 3 motions in 4 days, all denied." A pause. "Maya, it's moving. This is moving." "I know." She took a breath. "I just don't want to assume it's over before it's over." "It isn't over," he said, "but it's not going to stop either." She trusted that assessment. Ethan had spent his career making accurate assessments in conditions considerably worse than this one. "Okay," she said, "I'll head home." "Get some sleep," he said. You haven't been sleeping." 4 months of practice," she said. "Try anyway." She drove home. She slept for 7 hours, which was not 9, but was better than 4 months of practice. The AG's press conference was on a Tuesday. Sandra Okafor stood at a podium in the State Attorney General's office and read a prepared statement with the composed precision of someone who had written and rewritten it and was now delivering the final version without inflection, because inflection would invite questions she wasn't prepared to answer yet. She described the investigation in broad strokes: the falsification of medical records and financial documents, the coordinated effort to acquire the Millhaven property through manufactured legal pressure, the connection to a larger municipal procurement scheme, and the identification of multiple individuals whose conduct was under active investigation. She did not name names at the press conference. She didn't need to. The Pacific Record had named them that morning, in a piece that ran to 6,000 words with documentation, and by the time Okafor stood at the podium, the names were already circulating faster than any press statement could control. Raymond Hollis, Darlene Marsh, Gerald Pruitt, and a fourth name that hadn't appeared in any previous coverage, Victor Gallen, the managing partner of a private development firm called Greenfield Infrastructure Partners, which the Pacific Record described as the central financial entity through which the procurement network had operated for 8 years. Gallen's company had received contracts from 4 Oregon municipalities. Gallen's company had, per the Pacific Record's documentation, paid substantial consulting fees to an entity registered at an address that turned out to be a UPS store in southeast Portland. That entity had, in turn, made payments to an account connected to a Gerald Pruitt associate. The circle was not complicated once Noah had mapped it. It was the kind of structure that looks elaborate until you see it drawn out, and then it looks exactly like what it is, a wheel with spokes and a hub where all the money flows. Maya watched the press conference on her laptop. She was sitting at her kitchen table. The legal pad from the previous week was still there, covered in notes she no longer needed. She had not moved it. When Okafor finished, Maya closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen. She thought about a courtroom 9 days ago. She thought about handcuffs and a 3-page charge sheet and a public defender she'd met 40 minutes before they brought her in. She thought about Raymond Hollis on the witness stand, talking about duty and trust, his hands folded and his suit costing more than most of her floor's nurses made in a month. She thought about all of that, and then she got up and washed her coffee cup and put it away, because the kitchen was getting cluttered and there was no reason to let it stay that way. The next 2 weeks were not quiet, but were, in their own way, manageable. Derek Foss filed a civil action against Ravenwood Medical Center and named Hollis and Marsh as individual defendants alongside the institution. The action alleged malicious prosecution, defamation, and civil conspiracy, the last count relying heavily on Noah's forensic findings and the email chains the federal warrant had produced. The hospital's board of directors, which had been conspicuously silent since the Pacific Record story, issued a statement saying they were conducting an internal review and that the board took seriously any allegations of misconduct by hospital leadership. Maya read the statement. She thought about what took seriously meant institutionally. Ryan called her that afternoon. Hospital's board meets Thursday, he said. Hollis has already been asked to take administrative leave pending the review. Who told you that? I have sources, he said. Which was, she supposed, true of any Army captain who'd spent 15 years in the field. What about Marsh? Similar status. The compliance office that generated the original report against you has been suspended pending review. She thought about Darlene Marsh and her reading glasses on a chain and her practiced expression of regret. And Pruitt? His office issued a statement this morning. Ryan's voice was dry. He said he looks forward to cooperating fully with investigators and that he's confident the facts will demonstrate his commitment to ethical public service. Of course he did. His chief of staff resigned this morning, Ryan added, the one who wrote the emails to Marsh's office. Maya sat with that for a moment. How does someone resign before their boss does? When the boss is trying to figure out how to keep the sinking ship afloat, sometimes the crew jumps before the order comes, he paused. The federal team is close, Maya. Noah said they're moving toward formal charges within the next 2 weeks. Formal charges for who? Gallen, definitely. Pruitt, likely. Hollis, probably on the state side rather than federal, but the civil action and the state criminal investigation are running parallel. She pressed her palm flat on the table. The habit. What happens to Ravenwood? As an institution? It was a question she'd been turning over for days. The hospital was not just Hollis and Marsh. It was 212 beds and a pediatric floor she had loved, and 400 staff members who had nothing to do with any of this, and a community that needed it to function. That's the harder question, Ryan said. The civil action will cost them. The reputational damage is already significant, but the institution itself... He stopped. I don't think anyone is trying to shut it down. The investigation is targeted at the individuals and the financial scheme, not at the hospital's operations. She had known this mostly, but it helped to hear it said plainly. Okay, she said. How are you doing? He asked. The shift in his voice was small but unmistakable, the question underneath the question. I don't know yet, she said. Ask me again when it's further along. That's fair, he said. The call she hadn't anticipated came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the vacated charges, from a number she didn't recognize and a voice she didn't immediately place. "Ms. Collins, my name is Dr. Adrian Voss. I'm the chair of Ravenwood's board of directors. I hope I haven't caught you at a bad time." Maya stood at her kitchen counter with her coffee going cold. "What can I do for you, Dr. Voss?" "I'd like to meet with you," Voss said. "In person, if you're willing. I understand if you're not." A pause. "The board has completed the first phase of its internal review. Raymond Hollis's employment has been terminated. Darlene Marsh has resigned. We are cooperating with both the state and federal investigations, and the board has authorized me to reach out to you directly." Another pause, longer. "We owe you an accounting, Ms. Collins. Whatever else comes from this, you deserve that from us directly." Maya looked at her coffee cup, at the window, at the stack of papers on the corner of the counter that hadn't moved in 3 weeks. "When were you thinking?" she said. They met on a Thursday at a neutral location, a conference room at a downtown law office, neither the hospital's territory nor Maya's, which was Voss's suggestion and which Maya thought was appropriate. Voss was in her 60s, a cardiologist by training who had moved into administration and board work, with the manner of someone who had spent decades translating between clinical reality and institutional politics. She arrived before Maya and was standing when Maya entered, which she had not needed to do. They sat. The hospital's legal counsel was present, on Voss's side of the table. Derek Voss sat beside Maya. "I'm going to say several things," Voss said, "and then I'm going to ask you one question. And the question isn't negotiating, it's genuine." Maya waited. "The board has determined that the compliance review that generated the case against you was initiated at the direction of Raymond Hollis, in coordination with Darlene Marsh, for the purpose of creating legal pressure sufficient to force the sale of the Millhaven property. The board did not sanction this. Several board members were misled about the basis for the compliance review. When I say we take responsibility as an institution, I mean that the institution failed to prevent this, and that failure is ours regardless of individual actors." She folded her hands on the table. "Your medical license was not revoked. The board intervened early enough to prevent that. But your employment was suspended, and the basis for that suspension was false. We want to restore your position, with back pay for the suspension period, and we want to issue a public statement making clear that no wrongdoing on your part was ever established." The room was quiet. "The question," Voss said, "is whether that's something you'd be willing to consider." Maya looked at her. She looked at Derek, who looked at her with the expression of someone carefully not having an opinion. She looked at the table. "What would my role be?" she asked. Voss's expression shifted. Surprise, carefully managed. "Whatever you want it to be. Your seniority would be restored. Your previous position is available. But if there's something else, there's something I want to propose," Maya said, "and I want it in writing before I agree to anything else." She laid it out over the next 45 minutes. Not because she'd been rehearsing it, she hadn't, not in any formal sense, but because she'd been thinking, for 21 years, about what a pediatric unit actually needed versus what it had, and about what happened to children who passed through hospital systems without adequate advocacy, and about the gap between institutional policy and the reality of a kid in a chair in a hallway at 2 a.m. with nowhere to go. She proposed a formal program, housed within Ravenwood's pediatric unit, staffed by a combination of medical and social services personnel, focused specifically on identifying and responding to children in the system without adequate support, without guardians, without advocates, without a next step after the medical care was complete, a position to oversee it, a budget line, a formal referral pathway to approved transitional housing and case management services, including, but not limited to, the Millhaven Foundation, which she intended to continue operating. Voss listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, Voss looked at her legal counsel, who looked at his notepad. Then Voss looked back at Maya. "I think we can do that," she said. "I need it in writing," Maya said. "Specific, budget attached, reporting structure. Not a pilot program, a permanent program, with a board-level commitment to its continuation." "Give us a week to draft it," Voss said. "I'll give you 10 days," Maya said, and Derek reviews the language. Derek, to his credit, did not visibly react to having his name used as a condition of settlement before he'd agreed to review anything. He wrote something on his notepad. 10 days, Voss agreed. They shook hands. The grip was firm on both sides, which Maya noted without reading too much into it. Institutional commitments were kept or broken based on structures, not handshakes. The 10 days would tell more than the handshake. She was in the elevator when her phone buzzed. A text from Noah. Federal grand jury convened this morning. Gallon indicted. Pruitt next. Hollis state charges expected Friday. She read it twice. Then she sent back, okay. Noah sent back a single thumbs up, which was, from Noah, approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the lobby, and the afternoon light came through the front windows in long horizontal lines across the marble floor. And Maya Collins walked out into it with her phone in her pocket and her coat unbuttoned and her wrist, the one that had bruised from the handcuffs. Finally, without any trace of color. She had 3 missed calls. 2 from numbers she didn't recognize, reporters, probably, and 1 from Ryan, which she would return in a few minutes. She was crossing the lobby toward the exit when the doors on the far side opened and a man came in fast, moving like someone who had made a decision 30 seconds ago and was now in the process of executing it before he could change his mind. She stopped. It was Gerald Pruitt. Not a suited, polished version of him. This was different. He was in a dark coat, no aide, no assistant. The controlled public face he'd worn for decades missing in a way that made him look smaller and more real than she'd ever seen him look, in 4 months of press statements and city council coverage. He scanned the lobby and his eyes found her immediately, which meant he had known she would be here, which meant he was better informed than she'd expected for a man whose chief of staff had just resigned. He crossed the lobby toward her. The security desk attendant looked up and then, when neither of them gave him a reason to intervene, looked back down. Ms. Collins. His voice was controlled but only just. I need 5 minutes. Maya looked at him. She thought about the parking garage and Raymond Hollis. She thought about 30 seconds that had turned into 0. You have 2, she said. He took a breath. The federal team is moving faster than anyone anticipated. I want you to understand that my involvement in what happened to you was... He stopped. His jaw worked. I made a mistake. Several mistakes. And I want to... To what? She said. Apologize before you're indicted so there's a record of it? His face tightened. That's not... Gerald. She said his first name without inflection, not as an intimacy, but as a marker. I don't need you to apologize to me. I need you to cooperate with every single investigator who asks you a question and to tell them everything you know about Victor Gallon and the 8 years of contracts in every municipality where this happened. That's what I need from you. He stared at her. That's all? That's not all, she said, but that's what I need from you specifically. The rest isn't mine to ask for. His expression was doing something complicated that she didn't try to interpret. He nodded once, the motion stiff and not quite voluntary. 2 minutes, she said. Done. She walked past him. Her phone was buzzing again, but Ryan calling back. She answered it as she pushed through the doors into the afternoon light. I was just going to call you, she said. Noah just texted me, Ryan said. Grand jury. I saw. How are you? He asked. Not the case. Her. Ask me again, she started. No, he said. Ask me again later. That's what you keep saying. I'm asking you now. She stood on the sidewalk outside the law office. The afternoon was cold and clear. Across the street, a woman was walking a dog that was determinedly interested in something near a fire hydrant. A city bus rolled through the intersection. An ordinary afternoon in a city where extraordinary things had been happening in courtrooms and federal offices and parking garages and lobbies for the last 4 months. I'm angry, she said. It came out more plainly than she expected. I've been trying not to be, but I am. For what they took. For the 4 months. For the handcuffs and the charge sheet and the way people looked at me in that courtroom. She paused. And She stopped again. I'm okay. Both things. A beat of silence on the line. Yeah, Ryan said quietly. Both things. She breathed. There's something else. What? When I was in there, Voss agreed to a program. At the hospital, permanent, budgeted, board committed. For kids in the system without advocates. Ryan was quiet for a moment. You negotiated that. In the meeting, before I agreed to anything. Another pause, longer. That's... He stopped, started again. She said yes? She said yes. She heard him breathe. It wasn't quite the sound of a military officer processing tactical information. It was the sound of a man who had once been 7 years old and had spent years trying not to forget a woman who said yes before the social worker finished the sentence. "Okay," he said. His voice was steady. "Okay, that's don't," she said gently. "I'm not," he said. But his voice was not entirely steady anymore, and they both let that be what it was. She was about to say something else when her other phone, the old number she'd kept active during the case, lit up with a text. From a number she didn't have saved. She glanced at it. "Ms. Collins, this is Victor Gallon. I need to speak with you immediately. There is information about your case that has not been disclosed to investigators. Meet me at the corner of Selden and Market in 20 minutes. Come alone. This involves people you trust." She stared at the message. "Maya?" Ryan's voice in her ear. "You still there?" She read the text again. "People you trust." "Ryan," she said. Her voice was even. "I need you to do something for me right now." "Ryan," she said. Her voice was even. "I need you to do something for me right now." "Tell me," he said. No hesitation, no follow-up questions yet. Just the immediate readiness of someone trained to act on incomplete information when the tone requires it. "I just received a text from a number I don't recognize. Whoever sent it says they're Victor Gallon. They want to meet me alone in 20 minutes at Selden and Market. They said there's information about my case that hasn't been disclosed to investigators." She paused. "They said it involves people I trust." The silence on Ryan's end was exactly 3 seconds. She counted. "Don't go," he said. "I'm not going alone," she said. That's what I said. I need you to forward me the number right now. Noah can run it in 10 minutes. His voice had shifted. The personal warmth was still there, but underneath it, something else had come forward. The part of him that had spent 15 years making decisions about when situations were what they appeared to be and when they weren't. "And Maya, stay where you are. Don't move until I call you back. I'm on a public sidewalk outside a law office." "Good. Stay there." She forwarded the text and the number and stood on the sidewalk while the city did its afternoon things around her. The woman with the dog had gone. The bus stop across the street had collected 3 people who were doing what people at bus stops do, standing close enough together for warmth, but far enough apart for the fiction of solitude. She watched them because watching something concrete helped her think. People you trust. It was a specific phrase, not your case or the investigation. People. It was either a deliberate attempt to destabilize her by suggesting the 3 officers were somehow compromised, or it was something Gallon actually knew. Both possibilities were uncomfortable. The second one was considerably worse. Her phone buzzed. "Ryan. Number is registered to a prepaid purchased at a convenience store in Beaverton 3 days ago," he said, "which doesn't tell us much except that someone didn't want to be traced. Could still be Gallon. Could be anyone." A beat. "Ethan's with me. Noah is still at the federal debrief, but I texted him the number. He's going to run it against Gallon's known communication patterns. If this is actually Gallon making contact outside his attorney, that's its own problem. Federal defendants aren't supposed to be reaching out to material witnesses." "I know," she said. "So either this is Gallon panicking and doing something his lawyer would hate, or it's someone using Gallon's name to get you somewhere specific." He stopped. "Either way, you're not going alone." "I wasn't planning to," she said. "I've been a nurse for 34 years, Ryan. I know when something is off." "I know you do." A pause. "Can you give us 15 minutes? The text said 20. That was 4 minutes ago." 14 minutes, he said. "Can you stall if it comes to it?" "I can stall," she said. They pulled up 12 minutes later in Ryan's rental, a dark blue sedan that was thoroughly unremarkable, which she suspected was deliberate. Ethan was in the passenger seat. She got in the back and closed the door, and Ryan pulled away from the curb immediately, already moving toward the intersection of Selden and Market while she was still situating herself. "Talk to me about the phrase," Ethan said. He was turned slightly in the passenger seat, enough to see her. "People you trust. What did you take that to mean?" "One of 3 things," she said. "Either it's a bluff, they don't actually have anything, and they're trying to rattle me into meeting alone, or they're implying something about the 3 of you, which is either false or they have something I don't know about, or... She stopped. Or, Ryan said. There's something about the foundation, she said. Something about the Millhaven operations that I don't know about. Something that wasn't in what you gave to investigators. She said it plainly, not as an accusation. Ethan looked at her. There isn't, he said. Everything we had went to the federal team. I believe you, she said. But Gallen's been running a procurement network for 8 years. He has information we might not have gotten to yet. The intersection of Selden and Market was 6 blocks away. Ryan slowed as they approached it, taking the corner wide and slow, the way you drive when you're looking at something rather than going somewhere. The corner itself was unremarkable. A dry cleaner, a phone repair shop, a narrow parking lot beside a commercial building. Nothing inherently threatening about it. Nothing inherently safe either. A man was standing near the parking lot entrance. He was in his late 50s, heavier than his professional photographs suggested, wearing a coat that looked like it had been chosen for warmth rather than appearance. He was looking at his phone. That's him, Maya said. I've seen his picture. Ryan found a spot half a block up and parked. We can see the corner from here, he said. If you want to approach, we're 30 seconds back. I'm going to approach, Maya said. Maya, he specifically asked to meet me, she said. If he sees military officers, he might not talk. And whatever he has, if he has something, I need to hear it before anyone else decides what it means. She looked at Ethan. I have my phone. If I don't text you in 10 minutes, come. Ethan held her gaze for a moment. She could see the calculation happening, the risk assessment, the alternative approaches, the probability that she was right that a direct approach from her alone was the right play. She'd watched him do versions of this calculation for 3 decades, and she knew what it looked like when he landed. 10 minutes, he said. Not 11. She got out of the car. Gallen saw her when she was 20 feet away. He put his phone in his pocket and straightened, and she watched him decide in real time how to position himself for this conversation. He settled on a kind of controlled distress, not performing, actually distressed, but managing it with the habits of a man who had spent years managing how he appeared in rooms where things were being decided about him. Miss Collins, he nodded, an offered hand. Thank you for coming. I almost didn't, she said. The alone requirement was a problem. Something shifted in his expression. Are you... I'm standing on a public corner in broad daylight, she said. What did you want to tell me? He glanced around. The street wasn't busy, but it wasn't empty. He made the calculation and decided to go ahead. There's a piece of this that the investigators don't have yet, he said, and that He stopped, started again. My attorney is going to tell you I shouldn't be doing this. I know that. I'm doing it anyway because... Another stop. Because? She said. Because what they did to you specifically was not what I agreed to, he said. The land acquisition, the development project, I knew about the approach to buy the Millhaven property. I didn't know they were going to manufacture a criminal case against you to force the issue. That decision was Hollis. And Pruitt. He met her eyes. And a third person whose name isn't in the record yet. Maya went still. Not physically. She was standing exactly as she'd been standing, but something in her attention sharpened to a point. What name? Martin Reeve, he said. He's Ravenwood's outside legal counsel, not the hospital's general counsel. Outside, private practice. He's been the connecting point between Hollis's operation and Pruitt's office for 4 years. He paused. Reeve is the one who found the loophole in the Foundation's registration that they used as the basis for the compliance review. He designed the structure of the financial alterations to make them look like Foundation accounting errors rather than deliberate fraud. He's the one who told Hollis that the case would stick. Maya said nothing for a moment. She was building the architecture of it, where Reeve fit, what his involvement meant for the existing federal case, what Noah would be able to find once he had a name. Why are you telling me this? She said. If your attorney doesn't know you're here, you're potentially compromising your own position. My position, Gallen said, is already compromised. The grand jury indicted me this morning. I have approximately 6 days before my attorney enters into formal cooperation discussions with the federal team. He looked at her steadily. I'm telling you because Reeve is still operating. He's still in contact with Hollis. And the last communication I'm aware of, before I was cut off from most of this, was about a contingency. He paused. in case the case against you fell apart. What kind of contingency? His expression was not quite apologetic and not quite afraid. It was somewhere between those two things. I don't know the specifics. What I know is that Reeve told Hollis that if the charges were vacated, they needed an alternative way to discredit you before you could return to the hospital or the foundation, something that would create enough public doubt to neutralize whatever outcome the case produced. The dry cleaner's door opened and a woman came out carrying plastic-wrapped clothes, and for a moment the ordinary sound of the afternoon pushed through. Then the door closed and it was quiet again. When was this communication? Maya asked. 11 days ago, Gallen said. The day before the recess ended. She did the math. The day before Judge Ossie vacated the charges. And you're telling me now, she said, not the federal team. I'm telling you now because I don't know if this has already happened, he said. The contingency. I don't know what form it takes, and I thought... He stopped. His jaw was tight. You deserve to know it was out there. She looked at him for a moment. He was not a sympathetic figure, and she was not inclined to treat him as one. He'd been a knowing participant in a scheme that had cost 4 municipalities millions in misdirected contracts and had provided the financial infrastructure that made the case against her possible. He was telling her this partly because it helped him, and she knew it. But the information itself, if it was accurate, was separate from his reasons for sharing it. I need the specifics of what you know about Reeve, she said. Dates, communications, anything you can give me. Written, right now. He had his phone out before she finished the sentence. He'd anticipated this, she realized. He had come here prepared to give her something concrete. He spent 4 minutes typing, then turned the phone toward her. She read it, then said, "Send that to this number," and gave him Derek Foss's contact. He sent it. She watched the confirmation appear. "One more thing," she said. "The contingency. You said you don't know what form it takes. But you know something. Otherwise you wouldn't have used that specific word." Gallen looked at the pavement for a moment. "Reeve mentioned records," he said. "Not the medical records, something personal. About your past. The period before you came to Orchard Falls." He met her eyes. "I don't know what he found or whether it was real or manufactured. I only know he said he had something." Maya stood with that. Before she came to Orchard Falls. 21 years ago. A painful divorce and 3 boxes of belongings, and a nursing license from Washington State and a fresh start. "Thank you," she said, and walked away. She texted Ryan one word, "coming," and was back in the car in under a minute. She told them everything while Ryan drove, concisely, in the order it happened, without editorializing. Ethan listened with his hands in his lap. When she finished, he looked at Ryan, and Ryan looked back at him. And the look between them was the look of 2 people who have operated together for long enough that some conversations happen without words. "Reeve," Ethan said, "Noah can get into his communication records if the federal warrant covers outside counsel." "It might not cover outside counsel," Ryan said. "Attorney privilege." "Communications in furtherance of a crime aren't privileged," Ethan said. "If Reeve was coordinating the evidence fabrication, that's not legal advice. That's conspiracy." Maya looked between them. "The personal records," she said. "My past. Before I moved here. I need to know what Reeve thinks he has." Ryan glanced at her in the rear view. "Is there something—" "Nothing criminal," she said. "Nothing that would affect my license." She paused. "My marriage ended badly. The person I was married to. We don't have contact. But there was a period where things got complicated legally. Civil matters, not criminal. Sealed." "Sealed records can be accessed," Ethan said carefully. "I know," she said. "Which means if Reeve has something, it's either a civil record he obtained improperly or it's manufactured. Both are problems." She pressed her palm on the seat beside her. "But a manufactured personal record isn't what worries me. What worries me is the timing. Gallen said the contingency was discussed 11 days ago. The charges were vacated 4 days ago. If they were going to use something, they'd use it now. While I'm visible, while there's press attention, while it could do the most damage." "What would maximum damage look like?" Ryan asked. She thought about the meeting with Adrienne Voss, the program, the 10 days to draft documentation, the board-level commitment. "It would look like something that gives Ravenwood's board a reason to walk back the agreement before it's finalized," she said. The car was quiet. "When's the deadline for the board to send you the draft?" Ethan asked. 6 days, she said. Noah needs to know about Reeve today, Ethan said. Right now, before his debrief ends. Ryan was already dialing. Noah's debrief ended at 4:15. By 4:40, he was in a conference room at the federal building with Ryan, Ethan, Maya, and a federal investigator named Laura Tate, who had been the lead on the Gallon procurement case and who listened to everything Maya had told them with an expression of focused attention that reminded Maya, productively, of Okafor. Martin Reeve, Tate said when Maya finished. We have him on the periphery. He appears in 2 of the email chains as a recipient, but not as a sender in those specific communications. We haven't yet established his direct involvement. Gallon just gave you his direct involvement, Noah said. He had his laptop open. He was already running searches. If Gallon's account is accurate, Reeve designed the accounting structure of the fraud. That's enough to bring him inside the warrant. Gallon isn't a cooperating witness yet, Tate said. His account isn't evidentiary without formal cooperation agreement. It's a lead, Ethan said. You don't need the account to be evidentiary. You need it to know where to look. Tate considered this. She had the particular quality, Maya noticed, of someone who was genuinely thinking rather than performing consideration. What's your read on the contingency? She asked, directing the question at Maya. If it's a manufactured personal record, it'll surface through a media contact, Maya said. Someone will receive a tip and publish it before anyone can verify it. The damage is in the publication, not the accuracy. She paused. If it's an actual civil record, improperly obtained, then Reeve has committed a separate crime obtaining it. Either way, I'd rather know what it is before it appears somewhere. Can you tell us about the civil matter? Tate asked. Maya looked at the table. She had not talked about this with anyone in Orchard Falls in 21 years. It was a contained fact about a period of her life that she had moved on from, that had no bearing on her nursing career or the foundation or anything that had happened in the last 4 months. She had compartmentalized it, not out of shame, but out of the simple human preference for not carrying certain weights in public. She talked about it for 7 minutes. A civil dispute with her former husband over assets during the divorce proceedings. A legal motion she'd filed that had been sealed at the request of both parties. Nothing that affected her license. Nothing fraudulent. A painful period in a marriage that had deteriorated over 3 years and ended badly, the way some marriages do, without any single villain, without any clean narrative. When she finished, Tate nodded once. That civil record can't be unsealed without a court order and showing of cause. If Reeve accessed it, he did so illegally. Which means, Maya started, which means if he tries to use it, he exposes himself to additional charges, and anything he surfaces becomes evidence of that crime rather than evidence against you. Tate paused. We need to know if he's already moved. Noah, can you... Working on it, Noah said, without looking up from his laptop. He worked in the particular way he'd always worked, without visible urgency, without the performance of effort, just steadily, systematically, in a way that produced results at a speed that seemed disproportionate to the apparent calm of the process. Maya had watched him do this since he was 6 years old, with a broken radio he'd found in the alley behind the Millhaven house, and the quality of his attention had not changed, only the scale of what he applied it to. At 6:12, he looked up. Reeve made contact with a journalist 3 days ago, he said. Reporter named Casper Weil, who covers local government and public affairs for the Oregon Standard. The contact was through a personal email account, not Reeve's firm address. He turned the laptop so the room could see the screen. The email doesn't state explicitly what he was offering, but the subject line is background on Collins, off-record inquiry. And the body asks if Weil is interested in reviewing documents related to, quote, a history that contradicts the public narrative around the nurse at the center of the Ravenwood case. Did Weil respond? Tate asked. Weil replied once, Noah said. He said he'd need to review anything Reeve was offering before deciding whether it was newsworthy. He paused. There's no follow-up after that. Either they moved to phone or in-person contact, or Weil decided not to pursue it. Or Reeve hasn't sent the documents yet, Ryan said. We need Weil, Ethan said. We can't compel a journalist without a separate process, Tate said. She was already on her own phone. But we can pull Reeve's phone records through the warrant extension and see what contact he's had with Weil in the last 3 days. How long? Maya asked. Tate looked at her. Emergency request on an active federal case, a few hours, tonight if I push. Push, Ethan said. Tate looked at him with the mild expression of someone who is not accustomed to being told to do things they've already decided to do. "I was going to," she said. The next 3 hours were held in a kind of suspended tension that Maya managed by doing something practical. She called Derek Foss, told him about Reeve, and told him about the Gallon meeting, in that order, and listened to Derek have a brief internal crisis on the line and then reorganize himself into the attorney version of someone ready to act. "Reeve," Derek said, "if he's Hollis's outside counsel and he's been part of the scheme, that creates a conflict that voids attorney-client privilege for the relevant communications." "I know," she said, "but right now the more immediate concern is the journalist. If Weil publishes something before Reeve is formally charged, we can respond publicly. Your record is clean. A sealed civil proceeding from 20 years ago is not a scandal." He paused. "But the board?" "Yes," she said. "The board meeting is in 6 days," he said. "If something surfaces in the next 48 hours, "I know," she said, "which is why Tate needs to move tonight." She was in the waiting area outside the Federal Building conference room when Ethan came out and sat beside her. Not across from her, beside her, the way he would have sat when he was a teenager and something was difficult, and he didn't have words for it yet. He'd always done that. Come close physically when the verbal tools weren't adequate. She didn't say anything. He didn't either, for a moment. "This is the part I didn't plan for," he said finally. "None of us planned for Reeve," she said. "No, I mean," he stopped. "The personal piece. I knew about the civil case. You told me years ago. I didn't think—" He stopped again. "I should have accounted for it. When we were building the federal case, I should have flagged it as a potential vulnerability they might try to exploit." She looked at him. I was staring at the floor with the expression of someone doing a rigorous post-action analysis on himself, which was a very Ethan thing to do. "You found the backup archive," she said. "You got the federal warrant. You walked into Courtroom 7 with 40 pages of forensic evidence and a chain of custody that held up." She paused. "You can't account for everything." "I should have—" "Ethan." She said his name the way she'd said it when he was 9 and trying to take responsibility for things outside his control. It had the same effect now. He went quiet. "We're not done yet. We deal with what's in front of us." He nodded. The motion was slightly stiff, which meant he was accepting the point but still having feelings about it, which was appropriate. Ryan appeared in the doorway. "Tate has the phone records." The records showed 7 calls between Reeve's personal cell and a number registered to Casper Weil in the 3 days since the email contact. The last call was this morning, 50 minutes before Maya had met Gallon at the corner of Selden and Market. 50 minutes, Noah said. He was back at his laptop. "That's too close to be coincidence." "Gallon knew about the contingency," Ethan said. "Is it possible Gallon tipped us off specifically to disrupt Reeve's timeline?" "Gallon's cooperating with us whether he intended to or not," Tate said. She was standing at the head of the conference table with the phone record printout in her hand. If Weil was planning to publish, those calls were the setup. The question is whether the story is already filed or still in preparation. "I can find out," Noah said, and the way he said it suggested he already had an approach. "You cannot access a journalist's drafts," Tate said, with the precision of someone drawing a legal line. "I'm not going to access his drafts," Noah said, with the patience of someone who had anticipated this objection. But Weil's public social accounts show his publication pattern. He posts a preview tweet approximately 2 hours before any significant story goes live. His last post was 7 hours ago. He turned the laptop. Nothing since, which either means the story isn't ready or he's paused it. "Why would he pause it?" Ryan asked. "If his editor asked questions he couldn't answer," Maya said. Everyone looked at her. "Journalists at serious outlets don't publish defamatory material without verification," she said. "If Weil is a professional, and the Oregon Standard has a decent reputation, he'd have gone to his editor with what Reeve gave him. The editor would have asked if the subject had been approached for comment. Weil would have had to say no." She paused. "Standard practice is to give the subject a chance to respond before publication. If Weil hasn't reached out to me yet, either he hasn't decided to publish or he's about to." Tate was looking at her with an expression that had shifted slightly. "Would you be willing to be reachable tonight?" she asked. "If Weil makes contact, we want to know immediately." "Yes," Maya said. "And Maya," Tate said, When Weil contacts you, if he does, don't go to him alone. Ryan made a sound. Maya looked at him. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone deeply committed to not smiling. I've already learned that lesson tonight, Maya said. Once is enough. We'll call at 9:47. She was at her kitchen table with her phone face up and a cup of tea going cold, and the legal pad that had been sitting there for 2 weeks pushed to one side. Ethan was in the armchair across the room that she'd cleared of accumulated jackets for the occasion. Ryan was at the kitchen counter with his own coffee and his phone in his hand, ready. She answered on the second ring. Miss Collins? Young voice, male, careful. This is Casper Weil from the Oregon Standard. I'm sorry to call at this hour. I wanted to reach you before I finalize some reporting I'm working on. What are you working on? She said. I've been provided with documents that a source claims relate to legal proceedings involving you prior to your time in Orchard Falls. He paused. I want to give you an opportunity to respond before I make any decisions about publication. What documents specifically? She said. Not confrontational, even professional. He described them. The sealed civil proceeding. A summary document that, per his description, characterized the dispute as involving financial misconduct on Maya's part, a framing that bore no resemblance to what the actual record contained. Mr. Weil, she said, the civil record you've been given a description of is sealed. The characterization you've just described doesn't match the content of that record. I can tell you that because I was the party who requested the seal. She paused. The person who provided you this information is currently under federal investigation for evidence tampering and conspiracy. His name is Martin Reeve. The federal case number is... She looked at the paper in front of her, where Tate had written it 2 hours ago. She read it out, silence on the line. Mr. Weil, she said, I'd suggest you call your legal team before you file anything, and I'd suggest you preserve all communication you've had with Martin Reeve, because federal investigators are going to want it. More silence. Then, Miss Collins, I'm not threatening you, she said. You did the right thing calling me. I'm telling you what you're in the middle of so you can make an informed decision. She kept her voice level. If you want to verify what I'm telling you about Reeve's status, Investigator Laura Tate at the FBI's Portland office can confirm it. She's been notified you might call. She gave him Tate's number. She let him take it down. And then she waited. I need to speak with my editor, he said. His voice was careful and measured in the way of someone who has just realized the ground under a story has shifted in a direction that changes everything. Tonight. That sounds right, she said. Thank you for calling, Mr. Weil. She ended the call. Looked across the room at Ethan. He nodded once. Ryan set down his coffee. That's it, he said. Reeve's play is dead. Reeve's play is dead, she agreed, but Reeve isn't charged yet. He will be, Ethan said. I know. She looked at the legal pad, the cold tea, the stack of 4 months of documents in the corner that she had been meaning to put away. I just want to see it. What she meant was that she wanted the full accounting, not the partial kind, not the institutional settlement and the internal review and the administrative leave, the kind with names and courtrooms and public records, the kind that lasted. She was reaching for the cold tea when her phone buzzed with a text. From Tate. Reeve's attorney contacted us 20 minutes ago. He's offering cooperation in exchange for reduced exposure. We're going to take the meeting. His communications regarding Weil are now part of the warrant. Good work tonight. She read it twice, set the phone down, looked at the 2 men in her kitchen who had once been boys in a house on Millhaven Street. Reeve's cooperating, she said. Ryan exhaled. Ethan looked at the window, and then Maya's phone buzzed again. Not a text this time, a call. The caller ID read Ravenwood Medical Center, board office, and the time in the corner of the screen read 10:03 p.m., which was not a time that boards called unless something had broken in a way that couldn't wait until morning. She looked at it for one ring, then she answered. Ms. Collins. It was Adrienne Voss, and her voice had a quality Maya hadn't heard in it before. Not the composed authority of their meeting, but something tighter, something that was working to stay controlled. I apologize for the hour. I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere. A pause. Raymond Hollis called an emergency board member directly tonight, not through counsel, directly. He told her that you had been involved in federal misconduct, that you'd coached witnesses and provided false information to investigators. He sent her what he's claiming are communications between you and the military officers that show a coordinated effort to fabricate evidence. Another pause. I've looked at what he sent. It's either heavily edited or entirely manufactured, but I need to know from you directly. Is there anything in this that has any basis? Maya stood up from the kitchen table, not because she needed to, but because the moment required standing. No, she said, there isn't. And the source of what Hollis sent her is a man named Martin Reeve, who contacted my attorney 20 minutes ago to offer federal cooperation in exchange for reduced exposure. Whatever Hollis sent came from Reeve, and Reeve is now cooperating with the FBI. She kept her voice even. But Dr. Voss, how did Hollis get a direct line to a board member at 10 o'clock at night? The silence on the other end was 1 second too long. That, Voss said quietly, is an excellent question. The silence on Voss's end told Maya everything she needed to know about how a board member had come to receive a phone call from a terminated chief surgeon at 10 o'clock at night. Dr. Voss, she said carefully, which board member did Hollis contact? Another pause. Shorter this time. Voss had made a decision. Patricia Hale. She's been on the board for 11 years. She and Raymond Hollis have known each other for considerably longer than that. Maya looked across the kitchen at Ethan. He was already on his feet. She held up one finger. Give me a moment. And he stopped. Is Ms. Hale in a position to act on what Hollis sent her? Maya asked. She called 2 other board members before she called me, Voss said. Which means she was building a coalition before I knew any of this had happened. I found out because one of the 2 she called came to me instead. A breath. I want to be transparent with you. Patricia has enough relationships on this board to delay the program documentation, possibly to table the entire agreement if she calls for a formal review vote before the 10 days are up. Maya sat back down. Not because she was tired, she wasn't, or if she was, she'd stopped registering it, but because she was thinking, and thinking required stillness. Doesn't she call a review vote without cause? She asked. She can call for one. Whether it passes depends on who she's already spoken to. Voss paused. I've been chair for 3 years. I know this board. If Patricia gets to all 7 remaining members before I do, she might have enough to stall. A beat. I'm calling them tonight. That's why I'm telling you. I'm not waiting until morning, and I wanted you to know that. Maya looked at this kitchen table. The cold tea. The legal pad. The 4 months she was still, in some ways, carrying. Dr. Voss, she said, Hollis's contact with Patricia Hale using materials provided by a federal cooperating witness. That's potentially obstruction, attempting to interfere with a settlement agreement using manufactured evidence. I know, Voss said. I've already called our general counsel. She's awake and not happy about it. Good, Maya said. Then you have everything you need. Make your calls. I will. A pause. Ms. Collins, I'm sorry. For tonight and for all of it. I know that's institutional language, and I know it lands like institutional language, but I mean it personally as well. Maya thought about what to say to that. She thought about 34 years in a hallway, and a man who stopped saying hello when he decided she was a problem to be managed. She thought about what it cost to sit at a defense table in your own hospital's jurisdiction and listen to people who knew better say things they knew weren't true. Make the calls, she said. That's what matters right now. She ended it and set the phone down and looked at Ethan and Ryan, who had the expressions of men who had heard one side of a conversation and assembled the other side accurately. Hollis made a move through a board member, she said. We heard, Ryan said. Voss is handling it? She's handling it. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Old habit, still working. But I want Tate to know about this tonight. If Hollis used Reeves' materials to interfere with a pending settlement agreement, that's tampering, Ethan said. He already had his phone out. I'll call her. He stepped into the hallway. Ryan refilled his coffee without being asked and set a fresh cup in front of Maya without comment, and she drank it while Ethan spoke in low, efficient sentences in the hallway. And outside the kitchen window, the city was doing its late-night things. The distant sound of a siren several blocks over, a car passing slow on the wet street, the ordinary, uninterrupted motion of a world that didn't stop for anyone's crisis. When Ethan came back, he said, Tate's adding it to the file. She's recommending Hollis's attorney be notified tonight that any further contact with board members or other parties to the settlement constitutes a separate charge. Will the attorney rein him in? Ryan asked. Probably, Ethan said. Attorneys don't like their clients generating new charges while they're still managing existing ones. Maya nodded. She finished the coffee. She looked at the two of them, standing in her kitchen at 10:30 at night, in a city they didn't live in anymore, having upended their professional schedules for a month to stand in a parking lot and a courtroom and a federal conference room and a kitchen. And she felt something she'd been keeping at a careful distance for 4 months, which was the full weight of what it meant to not be alone in this. She had built a habit over 21 years of being self-sufficient. It was not a bad habit. It had served her. But it had also meant that when things went wrong, her first instinct was to handle it internally, to send an envelope in January and hope it was enough, to not pull people into her disaster unless the disaster required it. The disaster had required it. They had come. And she was still, in the privacy of her own chest, slightly undone by that. Go get some sleep, she said. Both of you. Ryan looked at his coffee. We're fine. I know you're fine, she said. I'm asking you to go anyway. There's nothing useful that happens tonight that requires you to be awake for it. Tate has what she needs. Voss is making calls. Reeves' attorney is already in motion. She looked at them steadily. Tomorrow there will be things to do. Tonight, sleep. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then he picked up his jacket from the back of the chair where he'd put it 6 hours ago. Call if anything changes, he said. I will, she said. Ryan put on his coat and paused at the kitchen doorway. He looked like he wanted to say something that wasn't quite forming into the right words. She recognized the look, had seen versions of it since he was 7 years old and trying to find language for things that were larger than his current vocabulary. You should have called us sooner, he said. In January, when you first knew something was wrong. You should have called us then. She looked at him. You're right, she said. I should have. He nodded. That was enough. The acknowledgement, the simple honesty of it, no defense, and no excessive apology. He turned and followed Ethan out, and she heard the front door close, and then the apartment was quiet. She sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes. Then she got up, put the cups in the sink, and went to bed. She slept for 8 hours without waking once. The board vote happened 4 days later, not 6. Voss had moved quickly. Maya learned afterward that she'd called all 9 remaining board members before midnight and had secured 6 commitments before Patricia Hale's second round of calls went out the following morning. Hale had managed to reach 4 members with Hollis's materials before Ravenwood's general counsel issued a formal communication advising board members that the materials in question originated from an individual under federal investigation for evidence tampering and that engaging with them further carried potential legal exposure. That letter, Maya suspected, had done more than any argument. The board voted 7-3 to ratify the settlement agreement and authorize the program documentation on a permanent basis. The vote was recorded in the board minutes, which were public record, which meant it was in the Orchard Falls Courier the following afternoon under a headline that read, Ravenwood Board approves child advocacy program, formally restores nurse's position. Maya read the article at her kitchen table with actual hot coffee. The article was accurate. It was also, for the first time in 4 months, entirely without the particular framing that had characterized every previous piece of coverage, the cautious qualifications, the alleged, the careful distance between her name and the word innocent. It just said what had happened, in the order it had happened, and what was going to happen next. She set the paper down and looked out the window. What? The federal charges came down on a Thursday. Victor Gallan was indicted on 7 counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and bribery of a public official. Gerald Pruitt was indicted on 4 counts, conspiracy, bribery, and 2 counts of obstruction. Martin Reeve, who had spent 2 weeks in cooperation discussions with the federal team, was charged on 3 counts with a cooperation agreement that significantly reduced his sentencing exposure in exchange for his testimony against Gallan and Pruitt. His bar license was suspended the same afternoon the charges were filed, pending review by the Oregon State Bar. Raymond Hollis was not indicted federally. His conduct had been primarily at the state level, and the state attorney general's office had been building its own case in parallel. The state charges came down the following Monday. Evidence tampering, criminal conspiracy, and malicious prosecution. 3 counts. He was arraigned and released on bail, and the photograph from the arraignment, Hollis in a suit that no longer looked expensive, flanked by 2 attorneys, walking through the same courthouse where Maya had stood in handcuffs 4 months earlier, ran in the Pacific Record and was picked up nationally. Darlene Marsh, who had resigned and cooperated with the state investigation early, was charged with a single count of accessory to evidence tampering. Her attorney was negotiating a plea. The compliance office she had run was dissolved by board action. Patricia Hale resigned from the board. The statement she issued used the phrase personal reasons, which fooled no one. Maya learned about each development from a combination of Derek Foss, Tate, and a news alert system that Noah had set up on her phone without asking permission, which she hadn't argued with because it was genuinely useful, and because arguing with Noah about systems he considered self-evidently correct was an effort with limited return. She learned about the Hollis arraignment photograph while she was at Ravenwood. She had gone back to the hospital on a Wednesday, not her first day back, which had been quiet and deliberate and involved a 40-minute meeting with the floor's current senior nurse to discuss the transition, and a walk through the pediatric unit that was professional and steady and only privately complicated. This was her 3rd day back, and she was in a meeting room with the social services coordinator assigned to the new program, working through referral pathways, when her phone buzzed with the news alert. She looked at the photograph. She looked at it for one moment. Then she set the phone face down on the table and went back to the referral pathway discussion, because the work in front of her was more important than the photograph, and because she had understood since January that what she wanted was not revenge, which was a feeling, temporary and consuming, but accountability, which was a structure, lasting and impersonal and much harder to achieve. She had the structure now. She would let the feeling go. The program launched 6 weeks after the board vote. They called it the Millhaven Advocacy Initiative, which was Maya's suggestion and which the board had accepted without revision, which she took as an indicator that the institution was, at least for now, in a period of genuinely trying to do better. The name mattered to her, not as a monument, but as a marker, a record that the house on Millhaven Street and the 11 years and the children who had passed through it were part of the hospital's official history now, documented and deliberate rather than hidden and improvised. The launch was a small event, deliberately. Maya had declined the suggestion of a press component. She'd told Voss, "The program doesn't need a launch event that's actually about me. It needs to work." The two things are different. Voss had accepted that too. What the launch was, practically, was a Monday morning meeting in a conference room on the pediatric floor with the 6 people who would initially staff the program. 2 social workers, a part-time child life specialist, a patient advocate who split her time between this and the oncology unit, a community liaison whose role was managing external referrals, and Maya herself, who held the program director position without pretending that title fully described what the job was going to be. She stood at the head of the table and looked at the 6 of them and said, "The program exists because children in this hospital sometimes have nowhere to go after we've done the medical part. Our job is to close that gap. Not all of it. We're not the whole system. But the part that touches this building and these floors is ours." She paused. "Any questions before we start?" The social worker on her left raised a hand. "What's our first case?" "Already in the system," Maya said. 11-year-old, 3rd floor, no identified guardian, been here 4 days post-appendectomy. I'll walk you through the file after this. They started. Ethan, Ryan, and Noah came to Orchard Falls one more time, 8 weeks after the launch. It wasn't a ceremony. Maya hadn't asked for one. What it was, practically, was a Saturday in October where the 3 of them drove up from where they'd been stationed or traveling and arrived at the Millhaven house. Still standing, still operating, still with a blue door that needed repainting, but that nobody had gotten around to yet because the residents kept voting to keep the exact shade. And they had lunch, the 5 of them counting the current house coordinator, at a kitchen table that was different from the one they'd grown up at, but occupied the same position in the same room. The lunch was not particularly graceful. Ryan burned the garlic bread, which he was defensive about. Noah spent 40 minutes of it on his laptop before Maya took it away and put it on top of the refrigerator, which he accepted without argument, which meant he was making a conscious choice to be present rather than working and knew it. Ethan talked more than he usually did, about his work, about a posting coming up, about a conversation he'd had with a senior officer who had asked him, apparently, how someone develops the kind of judgment you need for field command, and what he'd said. "What did you say?" Ryan asked. Ethan looked at his plate. "I said someone showed me that the right thing to do is usually simpler than it looks and harder than it sounds, and that the only way to build that judgment is to be around people who have it." He looked up. "Then I changed the subject before it got sentimental." Maya looked at him. I was 40 years old and had rank on his shoulders and the particular steadiness of someone who had made his choices deliberately and stood in them. And he was also the boy who had shown up with a broken arm and hadn't said much for 2 weeks, and then one afternoon had made a dinner that was mostly burned. "Good answer," she said. "I learned it from somewhere," he said. Noah, without looking up from the table, said, "You learned it from the woman who taught me that a system doesn't have to stay broken just because it's been broken for a long time." It wasn't directed at anyone and didn't require a response, which was how Noah communicated things he actually meant. Maya looked at the three of them and felt again the thing she'd felt standing in a doorway of a federal conference room 6 weeks ago, the full weight of not being alone in it. She didn't try to put language around it at the table. Some things lost accuracy when you pressed them into words. It was enough to sit in the kitchen of a house with a blue door on a Saturday in October and eat imperfectly cooked food and be exactly where she was. The trial for Hollis, Pruitt, and Gallen was set for the following spring. Maya was on the witness list. She'd known she would be. She was prepared for it in the same way she'd been prepared for the original courtroom, not with the assumption that it would be easy, but with the understanding that she would stand in that room and say what was true and let the record do the work. What she had learned in 4 months of being accused and 4 months of watching the machinery of accountability move, slowly, imperfectly, but move, was that justice was not an event. It was a process, and like most processes, it was unglamorous and procedural and frequently frustrating and sometimes ran at speeds that felt incompatible with the urgency of what it was supposed to address. But it moved. When there were people willing to push it, when there was evidence to point it in the right direction, when the institutions that were supposed to function actually functioned, it moved. She did not think the system was good. She had spent 34 years inside the medical system, which was another version of the same truth. Institutions were capable of extraordinary care and extraordinary failure, sometimes simultaneously, and the difference was often one person in one position willing to do the right thing at some cost to themselves. She was not a saint. She had made the choices she made because they were the choices available to her, and she hadn't been able to make herself make different ones. The boys had needed someone. She had been there. The system had failed and she had stepped into the gap, the way nurses step into gaps because the alternative is watching something get worse. That was not heroism. It was just showing up, which is what most of the meaningful things in life turn out to be. What she knew, standing in the hallway of the pediatric unit on a Tuesday morning with a case file in her hand and the sound of the floor doing its ordinary work around her, the monitors and the footsteps and the specific quality of quiet between the things that needed attention, was that she had not been broken by this. Not because she was stronger than what they'd tried to do to her. She wasn't. 4 months of it had cost her sleep and health and the particular kind of confidence that comes from knowing your community trusts you. It had cost her things she was still, in private moments, calculating the full sum of. But she was still here. The program was here. The Millhaven Foundation was here. 3 men with military ranks and an unbreakable sense of obligation were here, carrying something she had given them 20 years ago in the form of food and shelter and someone who showed up, and carrying it in ways she couldn't have predicted and hadn't needed to, because that was the nature of things that actually take root. She opened the case file. 11-year-old on the 3rd floor, now discharged and in a transitional placement coordinated by the program, doing cautiously well. A new referral on the 2nd floor. 8-year-old orthopedic case, family situation complicated and unclear. She read the intake notes, made 2 marks in the margin with a red pen, and walked toward the elevator. The floor was busy in the way it was always busy. The productive, slightly controlled chaos busy of people doing difficult work that mattered, taking shortcuts where shortcuts were safe and refusing them where they weren't, carrying more than they were being paid for because the alternative was patients not getting what they needed, which was not an alternative any of them could actually live with. Maya had spent 34 years in rooms like this one, and she intended to spend whatever came next in rooms like this one, because this was where the work was, and the work was what she knew how to do, and it turned out that was enough. more than enough. She pressed the elevator button and waited, case file under her arm, and the doors opened and she stepped in. The elevator went up. She had been underestimated her entire career, her entire life in some ways, by people who looked at a woman in a worn uniform and saw what they expected to see, someone without leverage, without resources, without the kind of power that requires titles and offices and suits that cost more than a floor nurse's monthly salary. People who assumed that because she didn't announce herself, she had nothing to announce. What they had never understood, and what the last 4 months had made undeniable in a way that was now on public record and court documents and 40 pages of federal forensic analysis, was that quiet is not the same as powerless. The work you do in the dark, the kid in the chair at 2 in the morning, the envelope mailed in January, the records printed before anyone knew they'd be needed, the decision to keep standing when everything institutional and official and publicly credentialed was pointed against you, that work doesn't disappear just because no one was watching. It accumulates. And one day, in a courtroom with a flickering light, it walks